Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Nio, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Wei. Thank you, Minesh, for putting this together. And thank you to the panelists, who I will introduce in a minute. My name is Graham Brown. I'm the host of Asia Tech Podcast. You may have listened to Asia Tech Podcast. What we do is we interview people like yourselves, investors, VCs, ecosystem builders, founders, all across Asia, and tell that story. So we don't have a lot of time, do we? We've got about 15, 20 minutes, so I'll be short in the introductions and hand it over to my panelists, ask them a few questions. So we are here to talk about trends in global retail investment. I'm not an investor, I'm a generalist. So I'm not going to claim to know anything about your job, so I'm going to help. With your help, you can answer that for me, the questions that I have. I have questions rather than answers, but what I've done is I've sat with possibly over 400 founders, investors and VCs in the last year with the podcast and listened to their story and listened to those amazing stories about the Asian century, all over Asia, the amazing things that people are building, and people like yourselves supporting those founders as well. So just to set the scene before I introduce my panelists, we're on the verge of 11/11, which is around the corner, the big day for retail and e-commerce in Asia, if not the world. And as already set the scene by Mr. Wei, is that we've seen a spree of acquisition by Alibaba and Tencent across Southeast Asia, Zalora, Lazada. We've heard O2O, we've heard new retail. We've had the rise of blockchain, the ICO storm, the ICO winter. So in the retail investment space, will 2019 be more of the same, or are we looking for something different in retail? So to help answer that question, I'm joined by two of my esteemed panelists, ecosystem builders, MD of Gobi Partners here in Hong Kong, overseeing consumer media and fintech in China and Hong Kong. You also manage the Alibaba Entrepreneurs Fund in Hong Kong. Chibo Tang, welcome. And to my right, the VP of Growth at Vectr Ventures, an engineer by education. Focuses on consumer tech now and hardware, ed tech. Also, you took Mimibox to Series C, is that correct? Yeah, so some claims to fame. You've actually been there. You've been on both sides of the table. Louisa Zhang, welcome. So getting started, Chibo, I'd like to hand this over to you. You manage 7 funds, is that correct, here across Asia? You must have seen a lot in the last year. Maybe you can summarize for us. What have you seen in the retail space over the last year? And then I want to ask you, what do you see coming next in 2019?
So I guess just a couple more words on kind of Gobi, the footprint, just kind of get an idea of kind of the coverage that we get. So we started off in China, a couple funds there in RMB and US dollar. We invest kind of in all different sectors in TMT and IT. Here in Hong Kong, we manage the Alibaba Entrepreneurs Fund. Southeast Asia, we have a number of funds as well, also in the early stage space, investing in internet and media. So I think in each of these different regions, there's obviously a lot going on. In the retail sector specifically, I think all the different markets are at different stages of development, and that will impact kind of the different deals and different business models that we're seeing. China's obviously maybe 5-6 years ahead of Southeast Asia. Hong Kong's really, the ecosystem just started, but it's like a vibrant consumer city as well. There's wherever you look, obviously, there's innovation all throughout the value chain, right? So whether that's in the supply chain, whether that's in kind of the product and the brand, or in distribution. I think that over the last 10 years, you've seen China take the lead and kind of really just introduce a lot of different business models, copy a lot from the US and kind of Western markets as well. And most of that has been, I would say, in the later part of the value chain in the kind of the distribution side, right? I think that as the market's matured, as like these business models have played out, lots of competition, you're seeing more innovation now going into kind of the product. You're seeing more innovation going into the supply chain, right? And I think that going forward, that those will be exciting areas to look into.
You said 5 to 6 years ahead of Southeast Asia. Compare China to, let's say, the US. How would you compare? On a same footing or ahead?
No, I mean, I think that the nature of those markets is very different, right? So, I mean, U.S. has obviously traditionally always been focused more on kind of the like technology, kind of real product innovation, and they've always been better at building brands, I think. I think in China, I mean, a lot of these entrepreneurs, they're very fast thinkers, they're very fast to adapt. They're able to take a lot of business models, bring it over to China, adapt to the local market. But at the same time, I mean, you see it more in terms of kind of the business model innovation, right? So, and that will play out more in kind of the distribution space, whether that's at the in the offline retail outlets or kind of like more so even on the online kind of different buying and purchase behavior and models.
Okay, and what excites you right now? If you are in your office, you want somebody to walk through that door as a startup in the retail space, what are you listening for? What do you want to hear? Do you want to see a blockchain startup coming in retail logistics, or is there a specific shopping list that you have? What excites you?
To be honest, I mean, I'm a little bit turned off on blockchain right now. I put some of my own PA in the beginning of the year. That didn't turn out very well.
Your crypto wallet? How's your crypto wallet doing?
Yeah, it's not very good. But no, I mean, I think that in terms of blockchain, look, I mean, there's been a lot of buzz, a lot of hype. How blockchain can actually apply to a lot of these sectors and kind of find actual use cases that are, that actually need blockchain. I mean, I think that's still to be seen. And I think that there's, the teams out there. I mean, there's some good teams, but many of them, they couldn't raise money from venture capitalists, right?
Right. Excellent. Louisa, welcome. Lovely to have you here. Vectr Ventures, what kind of involvement do you have in the retail space right now?
Sure. So we're a Hong Kong-based venture capital firm. We invest quite globally, so I think over 50% of our portfolios are actually in the US. And retail is a very interesting space for us because being able to sit in Hong Kong and to observe what's happening in China, in the US, and also kind of in the rest of the region, you see a lot of similarities with consumer behavior, but also a lot of differences in terms of where the markets are. So in terms of our involvement, we do have portfolio companies that, it's in kind of merchant payment, and I think overall we're quite focused on the kind of the offline retail space because based on my personal experience, I've been a retailer, I've done opening stores, I've done e-commerce, so through that experience, it's actually quite mind-boggling how fragmented and how behind some of these across the value chain a lot of the retailers are still facing today.
Here in Asia?
I think Asia, but even in the US, if you say go into a big convenience store today, the price tags are still manually printed, typed in, printed. Like if you need to put a product on the shelf, you need to manually create this planogram. There's a lot of manual labor involved throughout the value chain, whether it's in efficiency, whether it's in customer experience. So, those are the areas that we're quite focused on.
Right. And so I want to ask you as well, Louisa, you've sat on both sides of the table. You've grown startups, you've also sat and you've invested in startups and mentored them and advised them as well. What excites you right now? You've identified some clear problems that are out there. What is exciting in retail right now for you?
Sure, and I think in retail, a lot of people are thinking about like this idea of omni-channel, but when you speak with a lot of people, the angle they're approaching this is very different. Some people are thinking, I have this great online business and online traffic is very costly to acquire, so I'm just gonna go open some stores. or you have these mom and pop shops that's like, okay, I need to go online and open a web store. They kind of see these two as a very separate approach. The more successful or interesting ideas that I've seen are in when people think about how to connect the whole consumer experience without thinking whether it's online or offline. So it's really about linking the experience. So for example, if I have a great online business and now I want to go and like launch some physical stores, it's not just about opening the store. It's about like, how do I leverage the data I have? How do I think about my assortment across the different regions? And there are these very interesting data softwares that can help you achieve that. And on the other side, if you have a physical store and you're starting to think about going online, there's a lot you can leverage based on that. Say, for example, in the US, like if you go into a Sephora today, they don't just have you come into the store and then maybe hope one day you go back online and purchase. They do all these things to engage you. Say there's an app for you to test your skin color, where afterwards when you go home you can use that same, like I think it's called color ID, to like purchase lipsticks and skin products based on that test you did in store. So thinking about how to create this experience online and offline is very interesting.
So you mentioned Sephora as one example. Who's getting it right? I mean, I'll ask both the panelists here. In your day job, who do you see, from maybe some of the obvious brands to some of the ones that maybe we don't know so well, who are up and coming? Who are the brands and the companies and the software providers who are getting that right here in Asia right now in the retail space, connecting that whole customer experience? Chibo, what about yourself? If there's nobody, call it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can't really think of any names that come to mind directly. I think that I'm guilty of kind of making some impulse purchases, let's say, on Instagram as I'm swiping up. And they're like really crappy products, right? But, they do the picture so well, they like put it right in the feed. I mean, I'm just swiping and it's super boring, right? And then, oh, hey, this looks really interesting, right? So you ask about kind of what really excites you in like kind of the retail space. And you know what? I mean, I think it's really not the traditional retail players, right? I mean, it's right. When you think of like retail brands, you think of retail stores, you think about people who really used to sell things and the way they used to sell things. I mean, you know what? What's more exciting for me is actually these new options, these new channels of kind of buying
what,
and purchasing,
for example,
right?
Instagram,
like KOL economy, right? Like just these guys, I mean, they have millions of followers. They're like 19 years old. They're like doing backflips on their skateboard, right? But you know what? They can sell something, right? And I think that is something that's interesting.
Louisa, what about for yourself? Who's getting it right for you in Asia? Who would you say is a good model for others to copy? Maybe some of the brands that we know, maybe some that you see in your day job that we don't know.
I think there are a lot of brands who are doing a good job in this space, especially I think when you look in Southeast Asia, there are actually quite a lot of successful online brands who's been able to expand kind of offline. I guess to answer that, whenever I go to China and I bring kind of US friends, counterparts, business partners, I always take them to Hema supermarket.
This is the Alibaba store, right?
Yes, so it's the Alibaba like grocery store. I think for them it's less about the whole like, oh, cashless, like a cashierless checkout, because like that idea has been around. People have seen it in like Amazon Go. But I think it's the whole setup of you like go up to a product, they have this price tag that's on this digital display, and you scan it and you can actually see like the whole process of where that piece of fruit came from, which warehouse it went to. I think it's the whole experience of being a grocery store. They have been able to consolidate all the supply chain where the customers can get comfort around where the food came from and where it's been. So I think that whole experience, usually for, I bring anyone to a Hema store, they find it very impressive.
Yeah, I think they're approaching it in a way which is almost the same as an internet marketer would approach like a landing page, right? They're approaching it with that thought, that mindset of how do we get the consumer to interact with this environment rather than, we have a store, we have a physical building, and therefore that dictates how we interact with the customer, right? So I think that they're approaching the kind of things that we've learned from the internet. Like you say, the price tags are dynamic. They will market to you in store as well. This seems to me where these are not necessarily the sexiest technologies out there, but they create the best experience for the consumers. And I think this is the most exciting part about what's happening in Asia right now. So moving forward, 2019, maybe we have some time. I'm conscious of the clock here. Maybe one last question before we move to the break is that for 2019, what do you see in the retail space? We've seen a lot of consolidation, haven't we? We've seen a lot of acquisition, Alibaba and Tencent. We've seen Amazon move into Singapore very tentatively. And we're starting to see now a lot of work going into, you mentioned logistics, for example, Chibo, in last mile supply chain. So there seems to be a lot of building out of the infrastructure. Anything, for the audience here today, anything that you think they should pay attention to for 2019 coming up that you think is exciting, that you may think, unlike blockchain, for example, it isn't getting a lot of coverage right now?
I think you're going to see more of that infrastructure build out. And I think that what you've seen so far is just the beginning, right? You're whether it's these Chinese players, whether it's US players, whether it's Japan, Korean players, picking their battlegrounds in Southeast Asia. Everyone is just going for just expanding their existing ecosystem in the same ways to build out that infrastructure. And I think that will go further west, further east, further west. And I think
into
that
the
will
US?
go this will go into like Pakistan, this will go into Bangladesh, this will go into Middle East, right? Gobi, we're actually building out our presence out there as well. We're following, I guess you could say, the One Belt, One Road, right? I think that is something that these internet startups or these internet giants, I'd say.
What do you mean by that? You're following One Belt, One Road? I'm sure people are familiar with it.
Yeah, obviously we don't have enough time to really
A very
delve
top
into
level.
this, but
well, they've only given us 20 minutes, so give us the top level.
Exactly. Yeah. So Chinese entrepreneurs have always been very smart, right? They go where the government tells them to go because obviously, that's probably where the market will eventually go in the future. So there's been a lot of talk about kind of like One Belt, One Road, kind of extending the footprint, and I think that Chinese companies, that's what they're doing as well, And as these government policies make it more favorable for them to expand that footprint, that's actually what they're doing. And they're leveraging those policies, they're leveraging that kind of goodwill at the government level to kind of make these acquisitions, make these investments into the biggest, whether that's the e-commerce platforms or the payment platforms or the logistics platforms. These are the things that will build up the new economy in these new markets. And that will go out into places where, all the stands, all like the Middle East, even into Africa. And I think that those acquisitions will only intensify.
Excellent. Watch this space, 2019. Louisa, over to yourself. A year forecast. We're going to be here 2019 in this show, Startup Launchpad in Hong Kong. What are we going to be talking about?
I think I echo what Chibo said a little bit. I think what Chibo mentioned is, geographically expanding, but I think there's still a lot of, retail is a space that's quite hard to change because there is a lot of fragmentation, there is a lot of these traditional retail. So I think hopefully in a year, I would like to see a lot more kind of your mom and pop shops adopting some of these very easy to use, easy to set up technologies to better understand how the store runs. I think like you said, nowadays, people understand how an e-shop runs. They understand where the traffic is coming from, how much is the conversion, what's my ROI on my ad. And actually the same mindset can be applied to offline stores, which a lot of traditional retailers are not aware of. So, I think probably today here, there's probably a lot of products, hardwares that can help retailers get more intelligent about how to run their business. So I think in a year's time, we'll see a lot more adoption in that sense.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time. we're getting the sign to round up. So with that, thank you very much for your insights.
Wait, I'm not letting you guys off the hook yet.
Oh, okay.
As we've promised the audience, they get at least one question. So while you've got the esteemed presence of Gobi Ventures, of Gobi Partners and Vectr Ventures up there, does anybody have any questions for them? You've got a question.
So I have a question for Chibo. Chibo, you said you're done with blockchain. But what about blockchain for supply chain transparency? And we're in the supply chain industry. So what about things that are happening there? Are you guys looking at investing, especially with Alibaba having some interest in that space too?
I think, so Ali has actually done a lot in blockchain, whether that's under the radar, over the radar, whatever. I think that a lot of that has been private. I don't know how big of an opportunity there is for public blockchain or for kind of blockchain players that don't have an existing ecosystem with which to kind of back that up. And that's something that, you know, if there's something in supply chain, a lot of people are actually trying it from all over the world, right? So who has a competitive advantage there? It's tough to say.